You think stretching a grocery budget is hard? Think again. Somehow we forgot the kitchen secrets Grandma used to save money, like saving bacon grease and reusing bread bags for storage. So, let's rediscover those 30 forgotten secrets that saved her money every day. You'll wish you knew them sooner. Saving bacon grease wasn't fancy. It was what Grandma did when cooking oil cost too much and butter was saved for baking. She kept an old coffee tin by the stove. Every time bacon came out of the skillet, she poured the hot grease through a strainer into the tin. No waste, no second thoughts. The grease sat on the counter, solid and white, ready for the next meal. She used it to fry eggs in the morning, cook potatoes at dinner, season green beans, grease baking pans. It cost nothing because the bacon was already cooked. The grease added flavor to everything it touched, rich and salty. Grandma made it last for weeks, spooning out just enough each time. Then vegetable oil came in big plastic bottles at the grocery store. Cheap, easy, no tin to keep, no grease to save. Bacon grease disappeared from kitchen counters. Nobody saves it anymore. Stretching ground meat was survival. Grandma bought 1 pound of beef and fed 6 people. She mixed breadcrumbs into meatloaf, oats into hamburgers, cooked rice into meatballs. The meat went further. The family stayed full. Nobody complained. She crumbled stale bread into fine crumbs and worked them into the raw meat with her hands. The bread soaked up the juices and made the meat tender. Oats did the same thing, absorbing flavor and stretching the portion. Rice added bulk without changing the taste. A pound of ground beef became 2 pounds of meatloaf. It cost about $1 in 1972 to feed the whole family. The meal tasted like meat, not filler. Grandma served it with mashed potatoes and canned green beans. Then grocery stores started selling pre-made frozen meatballs and burgers. Convenience replaced creativity. Nobody stretches meat anymore. 1 pound feeds 2 people now, not 6. Saving vegetable scraps was common sense. Grandma kept a glass jar in the refrigerator. Every time she peeled carrots, chopped onions, trimmed celery, the scraps went into the jar. Potato peels, carrot tops, onion skins, celery leaves. Nothing was thrown away. When the jar filled up, she dumped everything into a pot of water and boiled it for an hour. The kitchen smelled like vegetables and salt. The liquid turned golden and rich. She strained out the scraps and had homemade soup stock. It cost nothing. The scraps were already trash. She used the stock to cook rice, make gravy, stretch soup. The flavor was deeper than water, lighter than store-bought broth. Then bouillon cubes came in boxes at the grocery store. Instant. No jar, no scraps, no boiling. Vegetable scrap jars disappeared from refrigerators. Nobody makes stock from trash anymore. Before we move on, many of you asked in the comments where to find these recipes. We even received tons of email too, so we published these recipes on our website. The link is in the description. Let's continue. Turning stale bread into something else was automatic. Grandma never threw bread away. If it went hard, it became breadcrumbs. She tore the slices into pieces, dried them in the oven, and crushed them with a rolling pin. The crumbs went into meatloaf, coated chicken, topped casseroles. If the bread was softer, it became stuffing. She cubed it, mixed it with butter and herbs, baked it alongside the chicken. If it was too stale to eat, it became croutons. She cubed it, tossed it with oil and salt, baked it until crispy. If it was really old, it became bread pudding. She soaked it in milk, eggs, and sugar, then baked it into dessert. 1 loaf of bread had 4 lives. It cost 50 cents in 1973. Then sliced bread came in plastic bags with preservatives. Bread stayed soft for weeks. Stale bread disappeared. Nobody saves it anymore. Washing and reusing glass jars was standard. Grandma saved every jar that came into the house. Pickle jars, jelly jars, mayonnaise jars, baby food jars. She washed them in hot soapy water, peeled off the labels, dried them completely. The jars lined the pantry shelves. Flour went in one, sugar in another, rice, beans, pasta, spices, leftover soup, homemade jelly, buttons, nails. Everything fit in a jar. The glass kept food fresh. The lids sealed tight. She could see what was inside without opening it. It cost nothing. The jars were free once the food was eaten. She labeled them with masking tape and a pencil. Then plastic containers came in sets at the store, matching lids, stackable, colorful, easy. Glass jars disappeared from pantries. Nobody washes pickle jars anymore. They go straight into the recycling bin. Grandma saved bacon grease in a tin. She stretched ground meat with breadcrumbs. She kept vegetable scraps in a jar for stock. She turned stale bread into 4 different meals. She washed every glass jar and filled her pantry. These weren't chores. They were survival. Nobody does this anymore. Rendering cooking fat at home was normal. Grandma didn't buy oil in bottles. She made it from pork fat or beef fat. When she cooked a roast or fried bacon, she saved every bit of fat. She cut the fat into small pieces and heated it slowly in a heavy pot on the stove. The fat melted into liquid. The leftover bits turned crispy. She strained the liquid through cheesecloth into a jar. It cooled into solid white lard or tallow. She used it to fry chicken, make pie crust, grease pans, season cast iron. It cost nothing because the fat came from meat she already bought. The lard made the flakiest pie crust. The tallow fried the crispiest chicken. Then vegetable oil came in big plastic jugs at the grocery store. Cheap, clean, no smell, no melting. Rendering fat at home disappeared. Nobody makes lard anymore. Cooking dried beans was cheaper than buying canned. So Grandma bought a 5-pound bag of dried beans for about $1 in 1973. That bag fed the family for weeks. She soaked the beans overnight in a big pot of water. The next morning, she drained them, added fresh water, and cooked them on the stove for 2 hours. The beans turned soft and creamy. She seasoned them with salt, pepper, and a ham bone. The kitchen smelled like comfort. She served them with cornbread and greens. Canned beans cost more and tasted like metal. Dried beans tasted clean and fresh. They filled you up and lasted forever in the pantry. Then microwaves and fast food changed how people cooked. Canned beans became easier. Nobody wanted to soak beans overnight. Dried beans disappeared from kitchens. Nobody cooks them anymore. Reusing leftover bones was efficient. Grandma roasted a chicken on Sunday. The family ate the meat. The bones went into a pot of water on Monday. She boiled them for hours. The kitchen filled with the smell of chicken and herbs. The water turned into rich broth. She used it to make soup. Then she saved the bones again. She added fresh water and boiled them a second time. The broth was lighter but still flavorful. She used it to cook rice or make gravy. Sometimes she boiled the bones a third time. The broth was thin, but better than plain water. One chicken fed the family 3 times. It cost about $2 in 1972. Then rotisserie chickens came in plastic containers at the grocery store. Cheap, fast, no bones, no broth. Boiling bones disappeared from kitchens. Nobody does it anymore. Cooking large one-pot meals saved time and money. Grandma made a big pot of soup, stew, or chili on Sunday. She filled it with whatever was in the pantry: beans, potatoes, carrots, tomatoes, leftover meat. The pot simmered on the stove all afternoon. The house smelled like dinner for hours. She served it on Sunday with cornbread. Monday, the family ate leftovers. Tuesday, she added water and more vegetables. Wednesday, it was still going. One pot fed 6 people for 3 days. It cost about $3 in 1973. The flavors got better as the pot sat. Nobody complained about eating the same thing. Then microwaves and takeout changed how families ate. One-pot meals became old-fashioned. Nobody cooks a pot for 3 days anymore. Dinner is different every night. Saving leftover cooking grease for greasing pans was practical. Grandma kept a small jar by the stove. After frying chicken or cooking sausage, she poured the leftover grease into the jar. When she baked cornbread or biscuits, she dipped a paper towel into the grease and rubbed it on the pan. The grease kept the food from sticking. It added flavor. It cost nothing because the grease came from food she already cooked. Butter was saved for spreading on bread or baking cakes. Grease was for pans. The cornbread came out golden and crispy on the bottom. The biscuits slid right out. Then non-stick pans and cooking spray came along. Easy. No jar, no grease, no flavor. Saving grease for pans disappeared. Nobody keeps a jar by the stove anymore. Butter and spray took over. Grandma rendered fat at home. She cooked dried beans from scratch. She boiled chicken bones 3 times. She made 1 pot of soup last 3 days. She greased pans with leftover cooking grease instead of butter. These secrets saved money when every penny counted. Nobody remembers them anymore. Reusing aluminum foil wasn't about being cheap. It was about not wasting something that still had life left in it. Grandma pulled the foil off the leftover roast, scraped off any stuck-on food with a knife, and washed it in warm, soapy water. She rinsed it clean and laid it flat on the counter to dry. Once it was dry, she folded it carefully and tucked it back in the drawer. The same piece of foil covered 3 or 4 dishes before it finally wore out and went into the trash. She used it to cover casseroles in the oven, wrap sandwiches for lunch, line baking sheets, keep leftovers fresh in the refrigerator. Each piece of foil cost a few cents in 1973, but a roll lasted 6 months when you reused every sheet. The foil never looked perfect after washing. It had creases and thin spots. But it still worked. It still kept food covered. It still reflected heat in the oven. Grandma didn't think twice about washing it. It was just what you did. Then everything became normal. Foil was cheap enough to use once and throw away. Paper towels replaced cloth. Plastic wrap replaced washed foil. Convenience replaced care. Washing aluminum foil disappeared from kitchens. Now people tear off a fresh sheet every time, use it once and toss it. The idea of washing foil sounds strange, but Grandma did it every single day without question. Reusing bread bags was automatic. Grandma pulled the empty bag off the last slice of bread, shook out the crumbs, and folded it into the drawer. She had a stack of them, flattened and ready. She used them to wrap sandwiches for school lunches, store leftovers in the refrigerator, freeze ground meat from the butcher, pack cookies for neighbors, line the trash can in the bathroom, cover her hands when she shaped meatballs. The bags were clean, sturdy, and free. They worked just as well as store-bought storage bags. She used them until they tore. Then she threw them away and grabbed another from the stack. A loaf of bread cost about 50 cents in 1972. The bag came free with the bread. Reusing it meant one less thing to buy at the store. The bread bags had logos and twist ties. Some had printed recipes on the back. Grandma saved the twist ties too, coiling them around her finger and dropping them into a jar. She used them to close other bags, tie up plants in the garden, organize cords. Nothing was wasted, not the bag, not the tie. Then resealable plastic bags came in boxes at the grocery store. Ziploc, easy, strong, no crumbs to shake out. Bread bags disappeared from kitchen drawers. Now people throw them away with the last slice. Nobody saves them. Nobody washes them. Nobody even thinks about it. But Grandma never bought a single storage bag in her life. Saving potato boiling water was an old baking trick. Grandma boiled potatoes for dinner and poured the starchy water into a jar instead of dumping it down the sink. She let it cool on the counter. The next morning she used it to make bread. The potato water made the dough rise higher and stay soft longer. The starch fed the yeast. The bread came out fluffy and light with a tender crumb. She used the potato water the same way she would use plain water, measuring it into the flour with yeast and salt. The dough rose beautifully. The loaves baked golden and tall. The bread stayed fresh for days without going stale. It cost nothing because the potato water was already there. She was boiling potatoes anyway. Catching the water in a jar took 5 seconds. Using it in bread saved money on store-bought loaves and made better bread than anything from the bakery. The bread had a faint sweetness from the potato starch. The crust was crisp. The inside was soft and pillowy. Grandma made 2 loaves every week. Then sliced bread in plastic bags became cheaper than flour. Bread machines and stand mixers made baking easier, but fewer people bothered. Homemade bread became a hobby, not a necessity. Saving potato water disappeared. Now people drain potatoes straight into the sink without thinking. The water goes down the drain. Nobody catches it. Nobody bakes with it. The trick is gone. But Grandma's bread was the best bread you ever tasted. Reusing pickle brine was smart. Grandma finished the last pickle in the jar and saved the liquid. She sliced cucumbers, carrots, onions, or hard-boiled eggs and dropped them into the leftover brine. The jar went back into the refrigerator. A few days later, the vegetables were pickled, tangy, crisp, ready to eat. The brine still had vinegar, salt, dill, and spices. It still had plenty of flavor left. Reusing it meant she didn't have to make fresh brine from scratch. She didn't have to measure vinegar or boil water. She just added vegetables and waited. The pickles tasted almost as good as the first batch. Maybe a little milder, but still sour and crunchy. She reused the same brine 2 or 3 times before it got too weak. A jar of pickles cost about 75 cents in 1973. The brine came free with the pickles. Reusing it turned 1 jar into 3 jars. She served the pickles with sandwiches, added them to potato salad, ate them straight from the jar as a snack. The whole family knew the pickle jar never ran dry. Grandma just kept adding vegetables. Then pre-sliced pickles in resealable plastic jars took over the refrigerator aisle. Convenient, consistent, no need to reuse anything. People ate the pickles and poured the brine down the sink. Reusing pickle brine disappeared. Now it sounds strange to drop cucumbers into old pickle juice, but Grandma did it every week. The brine was too good to waste. Using tea bags was normal. Grandma made her morning tea, steeped the bag for a few minutes, then pulled it out and laid it on a saucer to dry. The tea bag sat there all day, drying out on the counter. The next morning she used it again. The second cup was lighter, but it still tasted like tea. Sometimes she didn't mind. Weak tea was better than no tea. The tea bags dried stiff and flat on the saucer. She kept them lined up, ready for the next pot. Some people thought it was strange, But Grandma grew up during the Depression. You used everything until it was truly gone. Then tea became cheap. Boxes of 100 bags cost a few dollars. Single-serve pods made tea even easier. Fresh tea every time, no reusing, no drying. Reusing tea bags disappeared. Now people steep a bag once and throw it away without thinking. The idea of drying out a used tea bag sounds extreme. Grandma did it every single day. She never wasted a thing, not even a tea bag. Grandma washed aluminum foil and used it again. She saved bread bags for storage. She caught potato water for baking bread. She refilled pickle jars with fresh vegetables. She dried tea bags and used them 3 times. These weren't old-fashioned habits. They were survival. Nobody does this anymore. Making butter by shaking cream in a jar was simple. Grandma poured heavy cream into a mason jar, screwed the lid on tight, and handed it to the kids. They shook the jar for 10 or 15 minutes. At first, the cream sloshed around inside. Then it thickened into whipped cream. Then it separated into butter and buttermilk. The butter clumped together in a solid yellow mass. The buttermilk was thin and pale. Grandma poured off the buttermilk and saved it for baking. She rinsed the butter under cold water, squeezed out the extra liquid, and shaped it into a ball. She added a pinch of salt and wrapped it in wax paper. Homemade butter. It cost about 50 cents for a pint of cream in 1973. That pint made half a pound of butter. Store-bought butter cost about the same, but homemade butter tasted richer and fresher. The texture was creamier. The flavor was pure. Grandma spread it on warm biscuits, melted it over vegetables, used it in pie crust. The buttermilk went into pancakes, biscuits, cornbread. Nothing was wasted. Making butter was a weekend activity. The kids took turns shaking the jar. It was fun. It was useful. Then butter came in neat rectangular sticks, wrapped in paper at the grocery store. Cheap, consistent, no shaking, no mess. Making butter at home disappeared. Nobody shakes cream in a jar anymore. The tradition is gone, but Grandma's homemade butter was the best butter you ever tasted. Using cloth rags instead of paper towels was standard. Grandma cut up old towels, worn-out T-shirts, and faded dish towels into squares. She kept a stack of them in the drawer under the sink. When she spilled something, she grabbed a rag, wiped it up, rinsed the rag, and hung it to dry. The same rag cleaned up dozens of spills before it wore out completely. She used rags to wipe counters, dry dishes, clean windows, dust furniture, scrub the stove. Each rag was washed, dried, and reused until it fell apart. Then it became a cleaning rag for the garage or the car. Nothing was thrown away until it was completely useless. A roll of paper towels cost about 30 cents in 1972. Grandma bought 1 roll a year, maybe. She used it only for things that couldn't be washed, like grease or raw chicken juice. Everything else got cleaned with a cloth rag. The rags cost nothing because they came from clothes and towels that were already worn out. She washed them with the regular laundry. They lasted for years. Then paper towels became cheap and convenient. Entire aisles at the grocery store stocked them in bulk. People used them for everything: spills, messes, hands, counters. Cloth rags disappeared from kitchens. Now people tear off a paper towel, use it once, and throw it away. The idea of washing a rag sounds like extra work, but Grandma never bought paper towels. She didn't need them. The rags worked just fine. Saving citrus peels for homemade cleaners was clever. Grandma peeled oranges, lemons, or grapefruits and saved the peels in a jar. She filled the jar with white vinegar and let it sit on the counter for 2 weeks. The vinegar turned yellow and smelled like citrus instead of vinegar. She strained out the peels and poured the liquid into a spray bottle. Homemade citrus cleaner. She used it to clean counters, windows, sinks, the bathtub. It cut through grease and left the kitchen smelling fresh. The cleaner cost almost nothing. A bottle of white vinegar cost about 50 cents in 1973. The citrus peels were free because she was eating the fruit anyway. The cleaner worked just as well as store-bought spray. Maybe better. It didn't leave streaks on the windows. It didn't leave a chemical smell in the air. Citrus oil in the peels gave the cleaner natural degreasing power. Grandma wiped down the stove after every meal. She sprayed the counters before cooking. She cleaned the bathroom sink every morning. The bottle of cleaner lasted for weeks. Then chemical cleaners came in colorful bottles with brand names and promises. Lemon-scented, antibacterial, streak-free, easy, cheap. Saving citrus peels disappeared. Now people throw peels in the trash and buy bottles of cleaner at the store. Nobody soaks peels in vinegar anymore. Nobody makes cleaner at home. The tradition is gone. But Grandma's kitchen always smelled like lemons, and her counters were spotless. Making homemade salad dressing was faster than going to the store. Grandma mixed oil, vinegar, salt, pepper, and a little sugar in a jar. She shook it until it blended together. That was it. Simple vinaigrette. She poured it over lettuce, tomatoes, and cucumbers from the garden. The salad tasted fresh and light. She made the dressing right before dinner. It took 2 minutes. She didn't measure anything. She poured and tasted until it was right. Sometimes she added mustard or garlic or lemon juice. The flavor changed depending on what she had. The dressing cost almost nothing. A bottle of oil and a bottle of vinegar lasted for months. A salad with homemade dressing cost about 25 cents in 1973. Bottled dressing from the store cost about 75 cents and had ingredients she couldn't pronounce. Hers tasted better. The oil and vinegar separated in the jar, so she shook it again before each use. She kept the jar in the refrigerator and used it all week. Then bottled dressings in dozens of flavors filled grocery store shelves: ranch, Italian, Thousand Island, Caesar, all pre-made, all consistent, all convenient. Making dressing at home disappeared. Now people buy bottles and throw them away when they're empty. Nobody shakes oil and vinegar in a jar anymore. Nobody makes dressing from scratch. It sounds complicated, but Grandma did it every single night. The salad was always dressed perfectly, and it cost almost nothing. Using chicory to stretch coffee grounds was a Depression-era trick that lasted for decades. Grandma mixed roasted chicory root with her coffee grounds before brewing. The chicory stretched the coffee and added a slightly bitter, earthy flavor. A pound of coffee cost about 80 cents in 1973. Adding chicory made it last twice as long. She used half the coffee and half the chicory. The pot brewed dark and strong. The flavor was different, but it was still coffee, rich, hot, bitter enough to wake you up. Some people hated chicory coffee. Some people couldn't tell the difference. Grandma grew up drinking it during the Depression when real coffee was too expensive. She kept drinking it because it saved money and reminded her of home. She bought roasted chicory root in small bags at the grocery store, ground it herself, and mixed it with the coffee in the canister. She brewed it in a percolator on the stove. The kitchen filled with the smell of coffee every morning. The chicory didn't have caffeine, so the coffee was weaker, but nobody minded. It was warm and comforting, and it cost half as much. Then coffee became cheap. Big cans of pre-ground coffee filled the shelves. Then coffee became cheap. Big cans of pre-ground coffee filled the shelves. Single-serve pods made brewing even easier. Chicory disappeared from grocery stores. Nobody stretches coffee anymore. Nobody even knows what chicory tastes like. The idea of mixing something into coffee sounds strange now. Grandma drank chicory coffee every morning for 50 years. It tasted like home. Grandma made butter by shaking cream in a jar. She used cloth rags instead of paper towels. She soaked citrus peels in vinegar to make cleaner. She mixed oil and vinegar for salad dressing. She stretched coffee with chicory. These secrets saved money every single day. Nobody remembers them anymore. Using coarse salt to clean cast iron pans was the only way Grandma cleaned them. She never used soap. Soap stripped the seasoning off the iron and made food stick. Instead, she grabbed a handful of coarse salt and scrubbed the pan while it was still warm. The salt acted like sandpaper, scraping off stuck-on food without damaging the surface. She rubbed the salt around with a rag or a potato half, scrubbing in circles until the pan was clean. Then she rinsed it with hot water, dried it completely with a towel, and rubbed a thin layer of oil over the surface to keep it from rusting. The pan went back on the stove, ready for the next meal. Cast iron lasted forever if you treated it right. Grandma had pans that were 40 years old, smooth and black and perfectly seasoned. They cooked everything evenly. Nothing stuck. The salt cleaned them without scratching. A box of coarse salt cost about 20 cents in 1973 and lasted for months. The method worked because salt was abrasive but not harsh. It pulled off food residue without pulling off the seasoning. The pan stayed slick and non-stick. Grandma fried eggs in her cast iron every morning. The eggs slid right out. She cooked cornbread in the same pan at night. The crust was crispy and golden. She never had to replace her pans. They just got better with age. The seasoning built up over the years, layer after layer of oil baked into the iron. The pans were heavy and indestructible. They went from stovetop to oven without a problem. Then non-stick pans came along, Teflon-coated, lightweight, easy to clean with soap and a sponge. No seasoning required, no special care. Saving bones and scraps for a second pot of soup was smart. Grandma made soup on Sunday. Family ate it for dinner. The bones and vegetable scraps stayed in the pot. Monday morning, she added fresh water, a few more vegetables, and put the pot back on the stove. The bones still had flavor left in them. The second pot of soup was lighter than the first, but it was still good. She used it to stretch the meal another day or two. Bones went into the pot 3 or 4 times before she finally threw them away. Each time, she added water and whatever vegetables were left in the refrigerator: carrots, celery, onions, potatoes, a can of tomatoes if she had one. The soup changed every day, but it was always filling. The bones released gelatin and nutrients into the water. The broth turned rich and cloudy, tasted like comfort. The soup cost almost nothing because it was made from scraps and leftovers. A whole chicken cost about $2 in 1972. That chicken fed the family for a week. Roasted on Sunday, soup on Monday, second pot on Tuesday, chicken salad on Wednesday. Nothing was wasted, not the meat, not the bones, not the skin. Grandma used it all. The second pot of soup was a staple in her kitchen. She made it automatically, without thinking. The bones went back into the pot. The water went back on the stove. The soup simmered while she did laundry or cleaned the house. By dinner time, the broth was ready. She added noodles or rice and served it with bread. The family never complained. Soup was soup. It filled you up and warmed you from the inside. Then, rotisserie chickens came in plastic containers at the grocery store. Cheap, fast, already cooked. People ate the meat and threw the bones away. Soup came in cans. Broth came in boxes. Adding potatoes or grains to stretch thin soups was a common trick. Grandma made a pot of soup on Monday. By Wednesday, it was running low. Instead of making a new pot, she added peeled, diced potatoes or a handful of rice or barley. The pot went back on the stove. The potatoes absorbed the broth and released starch, thickening the soup and making it heartier. The rice or barley soaked up the liquid and swelled, adding bulk and texture. What started as a thin, watery soup became thick and filling again. The soup lasted another 2 days. One pot fed the family for a week. It cost about 50 cents to add potatoes or grains. A 5-pound bag of potatoes cost about 30 cents in 1973. A box of rice cost about 20 cents. Adding them to soup stretched the meal without starting from scratch. The flavor changed slightly, but it was still good. The potatoes made the soup creamy. The rice made it chewy. The barley made it thick and hearty. Grandma added whatever she had. Sometimes she added both potatoes and rice. The soup became a completely different meal. Nobody minded. Soup was soup. It was warm and filling, and it cost almost nothing. The family ate it with bread or crackers. They soaked up the broth with the bread and filled their bellies. Grandma made soup last as long as possible. She added water when it got too thick. She added potatoes when it got too thin. She added salt when it lost flavor. Pot stayed on the stove for days, simmering and changing and feeding the family. Then canned soup became cheaper than making it from scratch. Campbell's, Progresso, ready to heat and eat. People stopped making big pots of soup. They stopped stretching it with potatoes and grains. Soup became a single-serving meal, eaten from a can and thrown away. The tradition of stretching soup disappeared. Nobody adds potatoes to thin soup anymore. Nobody makes one pot last a week. The idea sounds old-fashioned, but Grandma's soup fed 6 people for 7 days on less than $2. That soup was survival. That soup was love. Composting kitchen scraps in a backyard slop bucket was standard practice. Grandma kept a metal bucket by the back door. Every vegetable peel, eggshell, coffee ground, and stale crust went into the bucket. At the end of the day, she carried it out to the compost pile in the corner of the yard or fed it to the chickens. Nothing organic went into the trash. The bucket smelled earthy and slightly sour, but it was just part of the kitchen. She rinsed it out every few days with the hose. The compost pile turned into rich, dark soil after a few months. She used it in the garden to grow tomatoes, beans, squash, peppers. The soil was free and full of nutrients. The vegetables grew bigger and tasted better. The chickens ate the scraps and laid eggs. The eggs went back into the kitchen. It was a circle. Nothing was wasted. Everything had a purpose. The slop bucket cost nothing. It was an old paint bucket or coffee can. The compost pile was just a corner of the yard where she dumped the scraps and let them rot. She turned the pile with a shovel every few weeks. It never smelled bad because it was outside, away from the house. The soil it made was black and crumbly. Better than anything you could buy at the store. A bag of potting soil cost about $1 in 1973. Compost was free. Grandma grew most of her vegetables from that compost. She saved hundreds of dollars a year by not buying vegetables at the store. The garden fed the family all summer. She canned the extra vegetables and stored them in the basement for winter. The slop bucket was part of the system. Then trash bags and garbage disposals made it easier to throw everything away. People stopped composting. They stopped keeping chickens. They stopped growing gardens. Kitchen scraps went into the trash, then into a landfill. The slop bucket disappeared. The compost pile disappeared. The garden got smaller or disappeared completely. Now people buy vegetables at the store year-round and throw away scraps without thinking. Nobody keeps a slop bucket anymore. The idea sounds dirty or difficult, but Grandma's bucket fed her garden, her chickens, and her family. That bucket was survival. Making soap from leftover cooking grease was an old skill Grandma learned from her mother. She saved bacon grease, lard, and beef tallow in a big tin can. When the can was full, she took it outside and made soap. She mixed the grease with lye and water in a heavy pot, stirring slowly over a fire or on the stove. The mixture was dangerous. Lye could burn skin. The fumes were strong. But Grandma knew what she was doing. The homemade soap was for heavy-duty cleaning. Making soap took time and effort, but it saved money. Grease was free. Lye cost about 50 cents for a can. Water was free. The soap cost almost nothing to make. Grandma made a batch twice a year and never ran out. And then laundry detergent came in boxes and bottles. Dish soap came in plastic squirt bottles. Bar soap came in every scent and color. Cheap, easy, safe, no lye, no fire, no danger. Making soap at home disappeared. People threw away cooking grease instead of saving it. The skill was lost. The tradition ended. Now homemade soap is a hobby, sold at craft fairs and farmers' markets for $10 a bar. But Grandma made it for free from scraps. That soap cleaned everything she owned. It was survival. It was resourcefulness. It was a skill that nobody teaches anymore. Sharing bulk food purchases with neighbors was how people saved money without driving to the store every week. Grandma and 3 neighbors went in together on a 50-pound sack of flour, a 20-pound bag of sugar, or a case of canned goods. They split the cost and divided the food. Each family paid less than they would have buying smaller amounts. A 50-pound bag of flour cost about $5 in 1973. Split 4 ways, it was $1.25 per family. A 5-pound bag at the store cost $2. Buying in bulk saved money, but nobody had room to store 50 pounds of flour. Sharing solved that problem. The women met at one house on Saturday morning and divided the food into smaller portions. They weighed it out on a kitchen scale, poured it into jars or cloth bags, and loaded everything into baskets or cardboard boxes. Everyone carried their share home. They did this with flour, sugar, rice, beans, oats, salt, even butter and lard when it was available. They bought from local farms or wholesale suppliers or split orders from the feed store. They saved money and built community at the same time. The neighbors knew each other well. They helped each other when someone ran short. They borrowed eggs or milk when the supply ran out before payday. They shared recipes and cooking tips. They traded vegetables from their gardens. Sharing bulk food was part of a larger system of cooperation and survival. It wasn't just about saving money. It was about taking care of each other. Then supermarkets got bigger and started offering sales and coupons that made buying in smaller amounts almost as cheap as bulk. Warehouse stores like Costco opened in the 1980s, letting individuals buy in bulk without needing to coordinate with neighbors. The neighborhood food-sharing system disappeared. People stopped meeting in kitchens to weigh out flour. They stopped coordinating bulk orders. They drove to the store alone and bought what they needed without talking to anyone. Convenience replaced community. Independence replaced cooperation. Neighbors stopped knowing each other as well. They waved from driveways but didn't share food anymore. The tradition ended quietly. Now people buy groceries alone, load them into their cars, and carry them inside without asking if anyone else needs anything. Nobody splits a sack of flour with 3 neighbors anymore. Nobody weighs out sugar on a kitchen scale while catching up on family news. Planning weekly leftover meals was how Grandma made sure nothing went to waste. She cooked big meals on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. By Wednesday, the refrigerator was full of small containers and bowls covered with wax paper or plates. Wednesday night was leftover night. She pulled everything out and lined the containers on the counter. Mashed potatoes, green beans, roast beef, gravy, biscuits, cornbread, half a casserole, a few slices of meatloaf. Each person filled their plate with whatever they wanted. Sometimes she combined everything into a big casserole and baked it. Sometimes she made soup from the scraps. But sometimes she just reheated everything and served it buffet style on the kitchen table. Nothing was thrown away. Every scrap of food was eaten. The family didn't complain. Leftover night was easy. No cooking from scratch. No planning a new meal. Just eating what was already there. Some weeks she had 2 leftover nights. Thursday and Friday became leftover nights if there was still food sitting in the refrigerator. By Saturday, the refrigerator was empty and clean, ready for Sunday's big meal to start the cycle over again. Planning leftover meals saved money because food didn't sit in the refrigerator until it spoiled. She didn't throw away half-eaten casseroles or dried-out meat or wilted vegetables. She used it all within a few days. A week's worth of groceries cost about $15 in 1973. Wasting food meant wasting money. Grandma didn't waste money. She planned around leftovers. She cooked extra on purpose so there would be enough for leftover night. She knew Wednesday was coming, so she made sure there was food to serve. The system worked perfectly. The family ate well all week. The grocery budget stretched further. Nobody went hungry. Leftover night was just part of the routine. Then fast food and takeout became normal parts of American life. People stopped cooking big meals at home. They stopped planning leftover nights. They threw away half-eaten containers of food and ordered pizza or Chinese food instead. Leftover night disappeared from family schedules. Refrigerators filled up with forgotten food that went bad before anyone remembered to eat it. People started throwing away more food than they actually consumed. The grocery budget doubled or tripled, but families ate out more and cooked less. Convenience replaced planning. Waste replaced resourcefulness. Now people buy groceries with good intentions, forget about them in the back of the refrigerator, and throw them away a week later when they've gone bad. Nobody plans a leftover night anymore. Saving sugar packets and condiments for home use was automatic for Grandma. She went to a diner or fast food restaurant and grabbed a few extra sugar packets, ketchup packets, salt and pepper, napkins, and plastic forks before leaving. She dropped them into her purse and brought them home. The sugar packets went into a jar in the pantry. The ketchup packets went into the refrigerator door. The napkins went into the drawer by the sink. She used them at home instead of buying those things at the store. A box of sugar cubes cost about 30 cents in 1973. The packets were free. A bottle of ketchup cost about 50 cents. The packets were free. Paper napkins cost about 20 cents for a pack. The napkins from restaurants were free. Bringing them home saved money over time. Some people thought it was cheap or embarrassing to take extra condiments. But Grandma didn't care what anyone thought. She grew up during the Depression when you took what was offered and didn't waste opportunities. The sugar packets were perfect for her morning coffee. She tore one open and poured it into her cup. One packet was exactly the right amount. The ketchup packets went on scrambled eggs or hamburgers or meatloaf. The napkins wiped up spills and cleaned hands. Everything had a use at home. She never took more than she reasonably needed. She didn't empty the dispenser or hoard entire handfuls. She took 3 or 4 sugar packets, a few ketchup packets, and a small stack of napkins, a reasonable amount. Over the course of a year, those free packets and napkins saved her $10 or $20. That money went toward groceries or utilities or something the family actually needed. The packets and napkins added up. Then restaurants started limiting condiments and napkins. They put them behind the counter instead of out on tables. They handed out 1 or 2 packets per order and nothing more. Buying bottles and boxes at the grocery store. Nobody saves sugar packets in a jar anymore. Nobody brings napkins home in their purse. The idea sounds petty or embarrassing. But Grandma's jar of sugar packets stayed full, and she never bought a box of sugar cubes. Her drawer of napkins was always stocked, and she never bought a pack of paper napkins. Those free packets and napkins saved money every single day for years. That was survival. That was resourcefulness. That was not wasting an opportunity when it was offered, and nobody does it anymore. Herbs in kitchen windows instead of buying them was practical and smart. Grandma kept small pots of basil, parsley, rosemary, and thyme on the windowsill above the sink. The sunlight streaming through the window kept them growing strong. She watered them every few days with leftover water from rinsing dishes. When she cooked, she walked over to the window, snipped off what she needed with kitchen scissors, and dropped the fresh herbs right into the pot. Fresh herbs for free whenever she needed them. A small pot of basil cost about 50 cents at the garden center in 1973. That single plant lasted for months if you kept cutting it back and didn't let it go to seed. She just kept trimming the leaves and it just kept growing back. A bunch of fresh basil at the grocery store cost about 30 cents and wilted within 3 days. Growing it at home was cheaper, easier, and the herbs were always fresh. She used them in spaghetti sauce, on roasted chicken, in vegetable soup, sprinkled over sliced tomatoes. The flavor was bright and strong, and nothing like the dusty, dried herbs sold in little glass jars at the store. Grandma started the herbs from seed in the spring or bought small starter plants at the garden center. She transplanted them into old coffee cans or chipped flower pots. The pots lined the windowsill in a neat row, green and fragrant and always within reach. The kitchen smelled like fresh herbs instead of dish soap. She pinched off leaves whenever she needed them for cooking. The plants never seemed to run out. They just kept growing new leaves to replace the ones she took. She didn't need much space, just one sunny window. The herbs didn't need much care, just water and sunlight. They saved money and added incredible flavor to every meal she cooked. Then dried herbs in those little glass jars filled entire aisles at the grocery store. Convenient, pre-measured, long-lasting on the shelf. People stopped growing fresh herbs at home. They bought bottles of dried basil and oregano and thyme and forgot about them in the back of the cupboard. The herbs lost their flavor after 6 months, but most people didn't notice or care. Fresh herbs became a specialty item sold in plastic clamshell containers at the grocery store for $2 or $3. People bought them, used half, and threw the rest away a few days later when the leaves turned brown and slimy. Growing herbs at home disappeared from kitchens. Windowsills above, sinks filled up with dish soap bottles and scrub brushes instead of pots of basil and parsley. The tradition ended quietly. Now people think growing herbs sounds complicated or time-consuming. They buy dried herbs in jars and call it good enough. But Grandma's windowsill was full of fresh green herbs that cost almost nothing and lasted all year long. She snipped fresh basil for spaghetti and fresh rosemary for roasted chicken. Those herbs saved money and made every single meal taste better. That was survival. That was flavor. That was resourcefulness growing in a coffee can. And nobody does it anymore. Drying fruit or vegetables at home for long-term storage was how Grandma preserved the harvest when it came in all at once. She sliced apples, peaches, tomatoes, peppers, or green beans and laid them in single layers on old window screens propped up on sawhorses in the backyard. The fruit and vegetables dried in the summer heat and sunshine, slowly shriveling into leathery pieces that lasted for months without refrigeration. She brought the screens inside at night to keep the morning dew from dampening everything. After 3 or 4 days in the hot sun, the fruit was completely dry and ready to store. She packed it into glass jars or cloth bags and kept them in the pantry. Dried apples lasted all winter long. She soaked them in water to rehydrate them and used them in pies or cooked them down into chunky applesauce. Dried tomatoes went into soup or stew, adding concentrated tomato flavor. Dried peppers went into chili or got ground into powder for seasoning. Dried green beans were strung on thread and hung in the pantry, ready to soak and cook whenever she needed them. Drying food cost absolutely nothing. And the sun did all the work. A bushel of apples cost about $2 in 1973. Fresh, those apples spoiled within a week or two. Dried, those same apples lasted 6 months and fed the family all through the winter when fresh fruit was expensive or unavailable. The dried fruit was chewy and intensely sweet. The flavor concentrated and deepened as the water evaporated. The apples tasted more like apples than fresh apples did. The tomatoes tasted richer and more complex. Grandma dried whatever was in season and abundant: peaches in July, tomatoes in August, apples in September, peppers in October. She worked in batches, slicing and laying out fruit every few days when the harvest was heavy. The screens filled the backyard, covered in rows of drying fruit. She turned the pieces over once a day so both sides dried evenly. The process was simple and required no special equipment. Slice the fruit, lay it out in the sun, wait, bring it inside at night, check it daily, store it when dry. No canning jars, no pressure cooker, no electricity, just sun and time and patience. Then home freezers became common and affordable in the 1960s and 1970s. People started freezing fruit and vegetables instead of drying them. Frozen food tasted fresher and more like the original. It was faster and easier. No screens to set up, no waiting for sunny days. Just wash, slice, bag, and freeze. Drying food at home disappeared almost completely. Nobody sets up window screens on sawhorses in the backyard anymore. Nobody slices apples and dries them in the sun for 3 days. The idea sounds old-fashioned, labor-intensive, and unnecessary. But Grandma's jars of dried fruit and vegetables lasted all winter and cost almost nothing to make. She had food when the garden was buried under snow and the stores had nothing fresh. Those dried apples were survival. That was making the summer harvest last through winter. That was resourcefulness powered by sunshine. And nobody does it anymore. 30 kitchen secrets. 30 ways Grandma saved money when every penny counted, saving bacon grease in a tin, stretching meat with breadcrumbs, keeping vegetable scraps for soup stock, turning stale bread into 4 different meals, washing glass jars and filling the pantry, rendering fat at home instead of buying oil, cooking dried beans from scratch, boiling bones 3 times for broth, making 1 pot of soup last 3 days, greasing pans with leftover cooking grease. When these weren't fancy tricks from cookbooks or cooking shows, they were survival skills passed down from mothers to daughters in kitchens where wasting food meant going hungry. Grandma didn't measure with cups or follow written recipes. She measured with her hands and her instincts. She knew how much salt to add by taste. She knew when bread dough was ready by feel. She learned from her mother, who learned from her mother, in an unbroken line of women who refused to waste a single thing. But somewhere between then and now, we stopped doing these things. We threw away bacon grease instead of saving it. We bought bottled salad dressing instead of mixing oil and vinegar. We tossed stale bread in the trash instead of turning it into crumbs or pudding. We replaced cloth rags with paper towels, homemade stock with bouillon cubes, and dried beans with canned ones. And tell us which kitchen secret you remember. And if you learned something today, subscribe so you never miss another forgotten trick from the past. Because once these secrets are gone, they're gone forever.